Today, we're ranking the top 20 Dynasty running backs into a tier list. Welcome to the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. My name is Cameron Lawrence, and I'm not going to waste any time today. We're just going to jump right in. We're going to start with our S tier, and this should be pretty obvious. It's Breece Hall, it's Bijan Robinson. Last year for Breece Hall was supposed to be a down year, right? He's coming off the ACL tear. We're all worried about it. However, he averaged 20 fantasy points a game from week 5 to 18, and he was the running back 2 with only 9 touchdowns. The reason I bring that up is because usually when you're a top 3 running back, you're relying on double-digit touchdowns. Breece only saw 9 of them. He led all running backs with 95 targets, 76 receptions, and 591 receiving yards. Now he goes from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers. Maybe he doesn't see 95 targets again, but he's at least going to be in the top 5, seeing 70 plus. Touchdowns are more than likely going to go up because this team's going to be in the red zone more. A lot to like for Breece Hall. He is my dynasty running back 1 and easily in this S tier. The other guy in here is Bijan Robinson. Obviously, last year, if you drafted him, very disappointing. Arthur Smith didn't really do what we wanted to with him. This team was disappointing. He did have 58 receptions, but he had 86 targets. The fact that he didn't catch 28 of them as a running back is pretty wild. And it was with a mobile quarterback. Right now, he goes to Kirk, who's a less mobile quarterback. They're going to continue to use him in the pass game. So that huge QB upgrade is going to be monumental for his fantasy production this season. He only had 4.6 yards per carry. He only had 214 attempts. Him and Algier are almost 50-50 on rushing attempts. I don't think that's going to nearly be the case this year. If it is, all of Atlanta just needs to get their head checked at this point, because that's just ridiculous if you're using a guy with Bijan's skill as 50-50. But what killed you with Bijan last year is he had 8 single-digit games. I don't think that's going to happen because of the volume that he'll see this year. So I would be confident with Bijan. And for this S tier, I have both of these guys worth at least 3 firsts in a single quarterback league. All right, let's move on to the A tier. And we got our 3 running backs, Jahmyr Gibbs, Christian McCaffrey, and Jonathan Taylor. Starting with Jahmyr Gibbs. He did average 1.6 fantasy points per game more than Bijan last year, which I just thought was impressive. 52 receptions and 1,200 total yards for a guy that was coming into the year. We all knew it was going to be a 50-50 split. He only played 56% of the snaps. Touchdowns was the concern for Gibbs going into last year, and he scored 11 of them. It was, for me, the hard thing was I didn't want to keep comparing him to Alvin Kamara before the season started. And then it was very similar to what we saw with Alvin Kamara in his rookie season with Mark Ingram. So was very, very happy if you had Gibbs last year. And he was the running back 4 from week 7 to 18, averaging 18 fantasy points per game. I think that can easily happen. And then if you ever lose Monty, then the sky's the limit for this guy. Monty's going to be 26. He's got 2 more years left on his deal. So I really, really like Jahmyr Gibbs here. The other guy on this list, the next guy, CMC. I mean, what more can we say? But he's the best running back in the NFL, right? I don't even think it's remotely close. I mean, after last year, I shouldn't say that. It is close, but he's definitely the best running back in the NFL. I mean, 330 touches last year, 2,000 total yards. He's in the most efficient ground game in the league. 5.4 yards per carry, 21 total touchdowns, 24.5 fantasy points per game. I mean, Kyren Williams was the next closest points per game, and he beat him by 4 points per game. The only issue with CMC, the only reason he's not in the S tier is he is 27. The traditional cliff for running backs is 28. I think maybe you can play a season or 2 after that. That's why I still have him up here, and just that upside is ridiculous. And the third guy on this tier is Jonathan Taylor. If you wanted to argue with me here and say Jonathan Taylor needs to be lower, I'll hear it out, right? I don't think he's like confirmed A tier. The upside says he is, right? He is, when he is healthy, he's 300 plus carries a year, 5 yards per carry, double-digit touchdowns. We'd love to see that. The problem is he's been banged up the last 2 seasons. We haven't seen Jonathan Taylor for a little bit. And now he brings in Anthony Richardson, rushing quarterback, probably going to take some goal line touchdowns, right? Because he's a bigger guy. The receiving work for Jonathan Taylor was never crazy, right? We're never talking close to 100 targets, but could that take a dip as well? So there's a little bit of unknown, but the upside for Jonathan Taylor is enough where I think it keeps him in this A tier, and he's good enough as a runner to be consistent enough to stay in this A tier. This next tier is our biggest tier. It's our B tier. And these guys, I think, are all in here for different reasons. Travis Etienne was running back 3 last year. He's the first guy we'll talk about. On the back of 73 targets. So the receiving work is really, really good. I don't know if that necessarily takes a huge step back. I think we could see a little bit of a step back. He had double-digit touchdowns, which was awesome after really not scoring the year before. The thing that I'm a little worried about is he was down at 3.8 yards per carry. So hopefully if this passing game takes a step forward again, then, that kind of opens up the run game. We can get him back in that mid to high 4s yards per carry. So I think there's still a lot of upside with Travis Etienne. Obviously, he was running back 3 last year on 16 fantasy points per game. I just don't know if he's the same eliteness, so to say, as these other guys to push him up into the A tier. But I think he's good enough and in a good enough situation to stay in this B tier. The next guy is De'von Achane. And man, is there anyone more polarizing than this guy in the NFL right now? From a fantasy perspective, 7.8 yards per carry. But he's 195 pounds and only played 11 games and was banged up the entire year. He was the running back 24 in 11 games, 17.3 points per game. I mean, the upside is so immense that if he's, let's say, he's 6 yards per carry next year, which would be crazy still. He needs 150, touches to hit 1,000 yards. Like, the upside is just so crazy for him that it's just so hard to just comprehend passing up on him in fantasy to not go all in. But man, it is a little nerve-wracking. So that's why he's in the B tier, because I think we need to see more than 11 games. I do want to go back. I told you the S tier was 3 firsts. A tier, I'd say 2 firsts plus-ish, right? I'm not looking for a big plus, but a plus. This tier is a first round plus, like 1 first plus. Like, I don't think you're gonna get 2 for any of the guys. Maybe you could, depending on the league. 12-man league, probably, maybe, if they're later firsts. But I would say first round plus for these guys. The next guy in B tier is Kyren Williams. The stats were insane last year, right? If you had Kyren was my guy that I kind of stashed before the season. Got incredibly lucky, sold him in both leagues. Not because I thought he was going to, tank. It was just wanted to try to upgrade at the position. 21 touches a game, 112 total yards a game, 1.25 touchdowns per game, and 5 yards per carry. The thing that worries me is they did add Corum in the 3rd round, who is honestly extremely similar to Kyren Williams. And for me, the worry with Kyren is he's undersized, and McVay is kind of similar to Shanahan in this way, where if you get hurt and the next back plays well, you don't return necessarily to the same role you had unless your name is Christian McCaffrey or Todd Gurley. So that is what worries me a little bit, is if he does get banged up, Corum could just easily take over. We don't know how. It's just the longevity of this run. I still think he's going to be fine this year. I still think he's going to be good this year. But I'm personally not going to draft him or trade for him this year because I just don't want a part of the McVay backfield. Next, we have Rachaad White, running back 4 last year, but only 3.6 yards per carry. One of the worst in the top, might have been the worst in the top 10. He also caught 64 of his 70 targets at 8.1 yards per reception. That's extreme efficiency catching the ball. He caught over 90% of his targets. Not necessarily going to happen again. He could definitely see 70 targets, though, again this season. 336 total touches. They did bring in Bucky Irving, but I don't know if he's necessarily enough to worry you about Rachaad White. So the workload needs to stay about the same for us to see another high volume, high fantasy finish. I don't know if it's exact same, but I do think that he definitely belongs in this tier. Next, we have Ken Walker. He's young. He's only 23 years old. He's extremely talented. The issue with Ken Walker is, can he score enough touchdowns and get enough work to make up for his lack of receiving work, right? Because he's in that Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb tier of receiving work, especially with the addition of Zach Charbonnet. Can he do enough of the other stuff? And it just worries me that I don't know if he can to ever be elite, right? I think he's going to be that running back 10 to 12 range, probably for, the next couple of years. Zach Charbonnet worries me a little bit, right? 2nd round draft capital on another running back who runs extremely hard. There's just a little bit of worries, but we do know that that he's still very young and that he's still extremely talented, a big home run hitter. So He belongs in this tier, but he's a little further down in this tier. For me personally, I know Lucas and Tyler have him a little bit higher. The last guy in this tier is Saquon Barkley, and I know he's kind of the odd man out because all these guys are 25 or younger. Saquon's 27 at this point, but top 10 in points per game over the last 2 seasons. Big contract to come to Philly, so he's got at least 2 more full seasons in Philly. And for me, he hasn't been a huge touchdown scorer the last couple of years, and he's still been putting up these points. In Philly, I mean, we saw Miles Sanders score 12, but then we saw Swift not score many this last season because of the tush push. So it'll be interesting to see how that works, but I don't think it hurts him at all if he only gets 8 or 9 touchdowns this season. The thing that's going to be interesting is the receiving work. We know he's going to get a ton of carries. We know he's going to be efficient on the ground. It's just, will he get enough receiving work to keep him as a top 5 potential back? I know in like best ball right now, he's going as the running back 6. So that'll be interesting to see, but I think he's talented enough and in a good enough situation that he belongs in this B tier. Next in the C tier, we have a couple middling running backs right here. We'll start with Isaiah Pacheco, running back 15, averaging 15 points per game last year. That's pretty much what he is. He's a solid high-end running back too. And because it really helps, he's on a great offense, with high touchdown upside each week. For me, Isaiah Pacheco, I'm looking at him as a consistent 10 to 13 PPR points per game every single week, with some boom weeks where he finds the end zone, where he breaks off some bigger runs to hit that 10 or to hit that 20, 25 fantasy point week. Next is James Cook, obviously another smaller back, but he saw 237 attempts last year, which was great to see, right? That was the worry. Is he ever going to get that workload? He did. You wish the receiving was a little bit higher because we know he's talented out of the backfield, although it was still pretty solid for having a rushing quarterback. And for James Cook last year, right, he had a good fantasy finish, and Josh Allen scored 15 rushing touchdowns. So the touchdown-wise isn't going to get worse, right? I don't think Josh Allen's going to put in 18 rushing touchdowns this year. So hopefully that comes back up, but you're not expecting high touchdown output from James Cook, which is not good and bad, right? It's bad because it caps the upside, but it's also good because you know these fantasy points are coming from somewhere that can be consistent again for multiple years to come. Next, we have Jonathan Brooks. This dude isn't even 21 years old yet. He's not even 21. That's just insane to think. He's got Dave Canales now. We just gave Rashad White 70 targets, just gave him 336 rush attempts. The only worry for Jonathan Brooks this season is obviously the ACL tear. They say he's supposed to be ready by July 1st, so we'll see if he gets the full workload. I can see first couple of weeks, you're a little disappointed, like, ooh, what's this? And then they really ramp him up. Right, Miles Sanders is a cut candidate. Chuba Hubbard, been great, but he's not exactly a threat in the backfield. Jonathan Brooks is who we think he is, right? I mean, if he's as good as we think he is, as we're projecting, as what we saw in college, Hubbard is not a threat for him. So with as young as he is, with the opportunity he has in Carolina, as ugly as it may be, he needs to be in this tier. And the final guy in this tier is Josh Jacobs. Green Bay has been great for running backs. He's the clear RB1 in this offense. I know they drafted Marshawn Lloyd. A.J. Dillon's still there, but he had a very disappointing season last year. If he's healthy, we'll probably get 2, maybe 3 more years of good Josh Jacobs in a good offense. The only worry for Josh Jacobs is he essentially signed a 1-year deal with 3 one-year team options that they could pick up, that there's no guaranteed money after this season. So that is the worry with Josh Jacobs, is that the Green Bay, if it's a down year, they move on from him. He kind of bounces around the league. That's why he's lower, right? Because I think this year he probably will score more points than Isaiah Pacheco, James Cook, and Jonathan Brooks. But the issue is, if he does have a more downer of a year and Marshawn Lloyd looks good, they could just move on from Josh Jacobs, not pick up the contract again, and kind of cut bait on that. Alrighty, and finally, we hit our D tier. We start with DeAndre Swift, who I'm actually coming back in on a little bit on DeAndre Swift, right? The receiving upside is going to be there again with Caleb. I mean, Caleb is kind of an improviser, so maybe not as high, as you're hoping. But if we can get that kind of James Conner with Kyler Murray, that would be amazing for DeAndre Swift. That'd be a great role. Last year, he looked good. The worry is kind of that Miles Sanders is, he comes out, and he was only good because he was in Philly behind that O-line with the threat of Jalen Hurts, with the threat of that receiving game. But I do think he proved enough that he can be the primary back. I don't think he's going to fall into a three-headed monster, but if he gets hurt, if anything happens, there is that concern. That's why I don't think he quite makes it into the C tier, but I do think there's decent upside with DeAndre Swift in Chicago. Next, we have Ramondre Stevenson, who's 26 years old. He's on the last year of his deal. He's in a bad offense. Antonio Gibson signed there will probably siphon some of the receiving work, be similar. I don't know how I want to say this. He's not going to be what Zeke was last year, but he's going to be annoying like Zeke was last year. If you had Ramondre Stevenson, you need to hope that he can maintain an extremely high workload. We'll see if that can happen, but I think the work will be good enough where he's a top, in that top 15 running back conversation for probably the next year, and then wherever he go. The interesting part, the reason he's lower too, is you just don't know what's going to happen next year. Obviously, it's probably going to be better than this, but you're just worried he could find a timeshare because this is the last year of his contract. Then I have Trey Benson. For me personally, I kind of wanted to put Trey Benson up in the C tier. I thought, you know what, he could find his way up there because I really, really like Trey Benson. For me, I do think he is the skill-wise the running back one in this. But I do think that for this year, Brooks has, a better spot. But the fellas' rankings, this is our consensus tiers. So it did dictate that he should be in this tier. He's very young. He's in a very exciting offense. Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride. They're going to score a lot of points. Kyler Murray is one of the few quarterbacks that does, like I said earlier, does dump it down to the running back. And James Conner only has one more year, and he hasn't exactly been the cleanest bill of health over his entire career. And then we have Javonte Williams next. Second year off the ACL, which is big, right? Running backs usually take a year. Very few running backs are Breece Hall, come back right away, average 20 fantasy points per game. So Javonte Williams, second year back. He's on here because he is still young, right? He's still 24 years old, still got a lot ahead of him. And he had a pretty decent workload last year. 58 targets, 217 attempts. They added Estime, so maybe he's still some goal line work. Jaleel McLaughlin, they kind of like, but I think he's definitely the lead back in this offense. They should continue to use him. And then we have Joe Mixon, and you may hate to hear it, but he has top 5 upside again. It's going to be gross, but he is the bell cow in this offense, and he runs good enough. He scores touchdowns and he catches the ball. So he does everything you want. And now he's in an extremely high-powered offense in Houston who's going to score a lot of touchdowns. I don't think it's going to be that different than what we've been seeing in Cincinnati, if I'm honest. Right? They still have Dameon Pierce there, but he's not a threat. Right? There is no threat to Joe Mixon. I think you get another 2 good years out of him. I think, like I said, it's probably going to be ugly, probably going to be gross. You don't want to see it, but he's got to be on this tier list. All right, I'm going to get quick before we head off, give you 4 honorable mentions. David Montgomery, Tony Pollard, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, all of them older running backs. Monty and Pollard splitting work, right? Monty, I think, that role that we saw last year, probably the same thing this year. Pollard will be interesting in Tennessee. They look like a team that's trying to go all in. I assume, he should get a lot of work. Hopefully he's back from that injury. Kamara and Henry, they're going to be workhorses in their backfield. Expect pretty much what we've seen. It's just the efficiency is going to continue to fall as both are 28 plus. Henry pushing 30 years old as of right now. All right, guys. Thank you for listening. We got podcasts coming on Tuesday. We got the Dynasty wide receivers being ranked on Wednesday by Lucas. Got another podcast on Thursday. And then after that, I will not see you for a week because I am moving back cross country, back up to Minnesota. But with that, I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and deuces.